What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's going on, guys? It's week 3 cashing points. Things are going to be a bit different this week. Graham Barfield is out due to internet issues. So I'm going to be your host, and I'm joined by Scott Barrett and Hilo. Scott, Hilo, how you guys doing this week?
Doing good.
So good, man.
Glad to hear it. Don't think we need to waste too much time. Obviously, I have 12 games to get through here. We can kick it off with the Denver Broncos at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Denver is a 6.5-point underdog. Total here is 41. Key injury notes: Vita Vea is doubtful. Antoine Winfield also out here. I'm having a really hard time finding much to like about these Denver guys in a blitz-heavy matchup where we really don't have a lot of confidence in Bo Nix. Hilo, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on the Denver side of this game before we get into a much more interesting team in Tampa Bay?
My thoughts are I don't want to really be going anywhere. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, Scott, you have anything to add on the Denver side? Maybe you could argue for Javonte Williams here.
You could. I probably won't.
I won't.
Maybe if I was an MME guy, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. On the Tampa Bay side, I know we absolutely love Chris Godwin this week. He is absolutely smashing in first downs per route run by a landslide, which is like the GOAT wide receiver stat. And I think Denver might be a pretty great matchup for Godwin. No team has blitzed more than the Broncos. Godwin sees a 26% increase to his targets per route run, a 53% increase to his yards per route run, 36% increase to his fantasy points per route run against the blitz over the last 2 seasons. This is also a really strong rushing matchup for Rachaad White. I'm still not sure where exactly I fall on White. Hilo, how do you feel about the Tampa Bay rushing attack and what should be an excellent matchup and, any of these other Tampa Bay plays?
Yeah, I mean, his opportunity share is still kind of sticking between 65-70% on a weekly basis. We only have 2 weeks of sample size, but that's down from last season, and the efficiency is never really going to be there with him. So if he's no longer like this true workhorse guy, if he's now just this kind of like lead back type profile, that kind of saps a lot of his upside. So I mean, and his price hasn't come down really enough to kind of reflect that yet. So to me, he's a complete stay away in kind of all formats. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are fully playable in all formats until further notice. It's an interesting dynamic because we expect Pat Surtain to travel. He's probably not going to be on an exclusive shadow on Mike Evans, or he could be. We don't know yet. But either way, Chris Godwin should see the least amount of Pat Surtain. So, I mean, Godwin in this like Cooper Kupp-esque type role for the Buccaneers, viable weekly floor. And his price hasn't caught up enough on DraftKings yet. They priced him up on FanDuel a little bit, but I think he's at like 6,500, I think, on DraftKings. And until he gets to like the low to mid sevens, he's just going to continue to be cash game viable for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Scott, anything to add on Rachaad or Tampa Bay?
I like Baker too. Top 3 in both EPA per dropback, fantasy points per dropback. He looks awesome. He's balling out. I know you had 2 great matchups, but like this is another really good one on paper. Denver's bottom 10 against the pass. They just happen to also be bottom 2 against the run. But like Tampa hasn't had much of a run game for years. So it's a run funnel defense, but a run funnel offense. Probably game script's a concern as well, but I don't know. Rachaad White, I think he's kind of underrated. I mean, we saw him get 60 plus receiving yards a few weeks ago. I seem to be a little bit more worried about Patrick Surtain on Evans than Hilo. But I mean, yeah, he had 60 plus receiving yards a few weeks ago. He got hurt last week. But even so, it seems to be like worst case scenario, 60-40 rushing split. He gets, plenty of work as receiver. Does he get the goal line work too? Like I can see that happening. So this could just be like an awesome matchup for him. We could be overstating what happened last week and the week before. Bucky Irvin just, he was running hot. He had a few long runs in his first few carries. Ultimately I don't even know that I'm writing him up for the slate breakdown, but he was someone I gave some thought to. And then, just Chris Godwin, nuts matchup, super valuable role.
Yeah. I think those are all great calls there. I don't think I would entertain Rachaad White much outside of maybe 150 maxing, but yeah, absolutely love Godwin. Think you can justify Evans here, and might play a little bit of Baker, but I am a little concerned about the potential for Tampa Bay to get pushed here if Denver just doesn't show up at all. Moving on to the New York Giants at the Cleveland Browns. Giants are 6.5-point underdogs. Total here is a rather gross 39. On the injury front, Cleveland, both starting tackles are questionable. That's worth monitoring given the Browns' backup tackles have been pretty bad in pass protection this year. We were talking pre-show about how Deshaun Watson's shoulder looks absolutely cooked. Amari Cooper is a pretty compelling FanDuel value this week. He's priced as the wide receiver 35, but he's been the wide receiver 11 by expected fantasy points per game. Schematic matchup isn't great. Hilo, do you have any interest in Cooper? Any interest in these Browns with Deshaun Watson throwing the ball like late career Phillip Rivers?
Yeah, I should mention also, I forgot to mention this in the last game. The Buccaneers defense is viable, even with Vita Vea out, even with Antoine Winfield and the other defensive line, I forgot his name. So they have 3 like primary contributors that are out, but just Todd Bowles against a rookie quarterback that has not proven the ability to read an NFL offense or an NFL defense. So that is viable. Back to Deshaun Watson, man. His mechanics are all messed up. I don't know if it's physical, mental, combination of both, probably combination of both. But like, if you watch him like try and throw outside the hash, it is disgusting. Like it looks like Grandpa Jim at the Thanksgiving cookout. It's bad. And then like with Amari Cooper, Amari is a guy that I feel like is influenced heavier than like your median NFL wide receiver with off the field stuff. So I don't know if that's affecting him. I mean, it's complete conjecture here, but he has 4 drops on the season, all 4 of which would have been either a touchdown or a long gain. And then his ADA is like top 10 in the league. So I don't know if they're just not like using him right. If Deshaun Watson's mental / physical / his shoulders not working right is contributing that as well. But there's clearly a disconnect. I don't know what's going on. I would have some interest in this backfield if we didn't just see Jerome Ford take kind of a back seat in a positive game environment last weekend. So yeah, there's not a ton for me to like, and on the slate where, like scoring is down. So we shouldn't need a 230 point, week to ship GPPs, but we still need to have, upside for 25, 30 fantasy points from everybody that we're putting in our roster. And I just don't see it from anyone here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Cooper, definitely a tough pill to swallow with Deshaun Watson playing so bad. Scott, anything to add on the Brown side before we talk Giants?
Yeah, I like Donta Foreman at 1%, 4,400. Like he's not an amazing play, but that's fine. You got the workhorse role. Browns are 4-point favorites against the Giants.
6.5.
5 run defense, 6.5. Yeah. Bottom 5 run defense. Watson sucks, like you said. But again, that's just like a super YOLO, 1% owned, cheap leverage off of Cam Akers. So
yeah, that would be the kind of play that if you're 150 maxing, maybe, push them in 3-4% of your lineups. Probably not getting there if you're, 3 maxing or anything like that. On the Giants side, I know, Scott, that we absolutely love Malik Neighbors this week. 64% target share, the most by any player in any game in 9 years last week. He's absolutely crushing in pretty much every metric after that Washington game. Sure, it was the nuts matchup, but Neighbors has scored 53% of his fantasy points against man coverage, despite facing man on just 15% of his routes. We know Cleveland loves to run man coverage. Scott, I mean, this feels like an awesome week to play Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think an interesting stat, like you can say, oh, that's a small sample size, which it is, but it's still like 50% of your fantasy points and 10% of your routes. Nuts, man heavy matchup. But it's also that it's the Giants who have faced too high coverage at the highest rate in the league. You just heard Aaron Rodgers complain about that with Garrett Wilson, but Browns play too high at the league's lowest rate. That was also true last year. So it looks like a good schematic matchup. I think he's a really strong value. This a player I really believe in. He was one of my Exodias. This is probably, the cheapest you'll ever get to play him again.
Yeah, I think that's quite sharp. Hilo, anything to add on Neighbors, the Giants? Any interest in Devin Singletary?
No, not really. Covered it all.
Gotcha. All right, great. Well, I think we got this game largely covered here, so we can.
Browns defense is viable.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah,
I
for
didn't
sure.
want to
Oh,
let
no,
that slip again.
definitely. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Those are
Against
great
Daniel
calls.
Jones, man.
Yeah.
They should be. I mean, they're kind of underperforming actually, the Browns defense as far as expectations for pressure rate. But that is something that they have Myles Garrett, so it's like like it can
Yeah.
always just uptick in a snap of a finger. So
Well, he is banged up, right?
he has been, yeah. He's been on the injury report over the first 2 weeks. He's played through it, and I think at normal snap rates. Let me double check that.
Yeah, I didn't catch any injury notes on Garrett. Doesn't look like he will go into this week with an injury designation. Was dealing with a bit of a foot issue.
Yeah, he's been on the report the first 2 weeks. He played 76%, then 68%. So it's slightly lower than he averaged last season, but I don't think anything to be material.
Yeah, probably nothing to worry about. Do like the Browns defense call there. Let's move on to probably the most fun game of the slate. It's the Philadelphia Eagles at the New Orleans Saints. Total here is 49.5, the second highest total on the slate. The Eagles are 2.5 point favorite or underdogs, excuse me. On the injury side, Philadelphia will not have A.J. Brown. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is also questionable with a foot injury. On the New Orleans side, Taysom Hill is questionable with a chest injury that he was actually hospitalized for after last week's Cowboys game. Would be pretty incredible if he was able to suit up, but these guys are awfully tough. There's a ton to get through here. I think the Philadelphia side will be a bit quicker. It feels to me like it's pretty much just Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert. Hilo, I'm curious how you want to play this game from a game theory perspective. It should be one of the most popular games of the slate. It's a really exciting game, I think, to just about everybody. We really want to make sure the Saints are for real. I mean, they certainly look the part. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so you're right. Like the Eagles are an offense that typically we've seen, at least over the past 3 years, where if one of their primary players is out, it kind of just gets more hyper focused on the remaining skill position players. So the field has identified that correctly with Devonta Smith. It's very, very unlikely that he sees fewer than 8 to 10 targets here, and he has upside for more. So, I mean, that is viable. What I didn't like out of last week from him is he kind of relinquished the slot role. So playing Britton Covey, being forced to play Britton Covey effectively moved Devonta Smith to the perimeter. And that's not where he's going to be most effective in this offense. They kind of need him to be like, to unlock his true ceiling here, they need him to be like a slot motion man, kind of similar to like a Cooper Kupp, a Tyreek Hill type. So while I think his ceiling is completely there, I would say he's probably has a lower, like a more narrow path to achieving that ceiling in this spot than I think the field is giving credit for. And at his price, just under 7K on DraftKings, there are some more interesting ways you can go. One of those ways that I really, really like to attack this spot is actually Saquon Barkley. I broke it down on the searching for ceiling with Rich Rebar earlier today, so I won't go into the full kind of discussion on like the schematic effects of this. But I'm looking for a higher rate of man gap usage against a Saints defense, and that's running behind man gap blocking. Because this Saints defense runs single high at such a high rate. And against single high, if you can get a pulling guard into the second level on the linebackers, you can generate these splash plays, a la what we saw last week with Josh Jacobs. Matt LaFleur was just doing that on repeat, like just down blocking with a tackle, pulling a guard, and getting that guard into the second level on static linebackers. And that's kind of what they have the opportunity to do here with Saquon. So, he has immense upside, and I really, really think Jalen Hurts has immense upside too against single high heavy team, because that typically harbors running back or quarterback rushing production. So all three of those guys are completely viable. I'm not personally in on Dallas Goedert. I think you can play Jalen Hurts naked this week, which I don't typically like doing. I think you can play him with Saquon, which is not going to be utilized, and then obviously with Devonta as well.
Yeah, I think those are great calls, and I think you need someone from Philadelphia to show up here for the Saints to get pushed and really hit their ceiling. I mean, we've seen them absolutely crush in the first half of games and then sort of take their foot off the gas because they're winning every game by 30 points. Scott, anything to add on the Philadelphia side before we get into New Orleans?
Yeah, it looks like Jalen Hurts is going to be one of the most popular quarterbacks. I don't know that I can get there. He's quietly sucked for a while now. Like if you look at his advanced passing metrics since like the second half of last year, he's really struggled. I know the fantasy production's been there, but now AJ Brown is hurt. Saquon scoring touchdowns on the ground. I thought Your point on single high coverage was really interesting. It's true that, like the thesis probably holds more water than these splits, but Hurts did average more fantasy points per dropback against two high than single high last year, for whatever that's worth. But really, it just comes down to, I don't know. I like Lamar Jackson more. Don't really feel comfortable enough with Hurts and Cash. But yeah, I think I might just be all in on Derek Carr and the Saints this week. 5% ownership just makes absolutely no sense to me. And like maybe some will say, oh, you're just overreacting to a 2-game sample size or whatever. But it's like, who is going to have the best offense in football this year? It's like, well, the Texans are kind of underwhelming. I guess it's not the Dolphins because 49ers are dealing with injury. The easy answer is, who has had the best offense in football these last 2 weeks? Clearly the Saints, who have the most points through 2 games, or second most points through 2 games of any team in 100 years. And like, I'm really buying into the notion that this is real. Just the play caller, Clint Kubiak, is doing like everything you would want to see them doing. Carr is averaging basically 20 fantasy points per game in just the first half of games this year, with like a 1.5 fantasy points per dropback. So basically like 3x anyone else. I just, the stacks are easy. It's a great schematic matchup for Rashid Shaheed, who's averaging like 20 yards per route run in the first quarter, and Chris Olave. They get a 50% boost against, what is it? Vic Fangio's single high defenses. And then Kamara is a great play as well.
Yeah. The Eagles have also really struggled to get pressure, and Rashid Shaheed sees an absolutely insane, almost 600% boost to his fantasy points per route run on plays without pressure. Obviously, Derek Carr needs time to push the ball downfield to Rashid Shaheed. He should have time to do that this week. Hilo, I'm curious how you want to handle these Saints with Kamara projecting to be quite popular. Same thing with Olave, same thing with Shaheed. Obviously, Carr's not pulling much ownership. I do expect Carr's projected ownership to come up a bit industry-wide. How do you want to play the Saints side of this game?
I mean, in small field, dude, you could pair all 3 of those guys with Carr.
Oh, yeah.
And just say, like, you legit could this week. If you're doing that, you need an Eagles piece, because again, they're kind of taking their foot off in the second half of these games where they're scoring 35 in the first half. But yeah, I mean, the schematic elements of this offense that are really, really popping on tape. One of the things that I've brought up in other places that I'll talk quickly about here now is the way that they are. The things that Kubiak is doing to keep Carr clean, to keep the pressure off. He's utilizing a lot of fullback and tight end motion. And then instead of those guys going on a route in the motion, he's keeping them into block to help off tackle, which is really, really impressive. That's effectively given them 6 offensive linemen, but still being able to have the motion to diagnose, am I in zone or am I against man right now? So they're utilizing these guys in motion, diagnosing, and now Derek Carr is sitting back there knowing in a single high look, is this cover 1 or cover 3? They get that motion. They look at the linebackers. They look at the safeties. Are the safeties cheating down, which is their responsibility against the run. And then from there, they're layering in play action, which is, again, meant to influence the safety responsibilities against the run. They have to cheat down, even if it's 1, 2, 3 steps. Now they're collapsing the depth on the back end. And that's why you're seeing these Shaheed long bombs. That's why you're seeing Chris Olave on deep slants, deep sweeps. So yeah, it's like all the elements that they're doing right now is legit. They're taking a look at defensive tendencies and they're saying, how can I exploit those? And that's exactly like what we want to see. So I'm a big time believer as well.
Yeah, I am really excited to load up on Saints this week, load up on Derek Carr stacks. And if you're into some longer shot bets, I mean, Derek Carr MVP at 30-1, Chris Olave Offensive Player of the Year at 125-1 are certainly pretty interesting with the way this offense has looked. Let's move on to a game that is probably the exact opposite of the game I just described. It's the Los Angeles Chargers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The total here is 35. The Chargers are 2.5-point underdogs. Obviously, big injury news here. Justin Herbert did pop up with a high ankle that he suffered in week 2. He looks truly questionable here. Josh Palmer also questionable with an elbow injury. I'm sure we can get through this pretty fast. High-low, this feels like a game out of 1948. I'd imagine we have maybe some interest in the running backs. I have maybe some interest in Ladd McConkey. What are your thoughts?
No, I have zero interest pretty much anywhere, especially like in GPPs, like even in cash. I mean, the Chargers running backs have been priced up based on recent production. There's really no value to be had there. And then if you're talking about playing George Pickens or anybody like this Pittsburgh team has shown us that they really don't want Justin Fields throwing more than 24 to 28 times. So if they're in control of a game environment, I would expect that to be like the range for Justin Fields. So I think they're going to just run. Jaylen Warren is now 2 weeks removed from, well, I guess 4 weeks removed from the hamstring injury he suffered in the preseason. So I'd expect him to see an uptick in snap rate. And I think they're just going to try and run as much as they possibly can. And the path to that is like that much more clear if Justin Herbert is out. So.
Yeah. No, I think that is spot on. Scott, anything to add for this game?
No, I will just say, one thing is that if Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder could combine to make it onto 6 winning Millie Maker lineups, it's going to happen at some point
with
Justin Fields.
Yeah.
And George Pickens is just an absolute freaking baller. I had this tweet on him that went viral, but he ranks second in ass, brutal cornerback matchups. He's going to have an 188-2 game very soon. Probably not in this matchup, but at some point that's going to smash.
Yeah,
with you.
Yeah, I think those are sharp calls. Moving on here to the Houston Texans at the Minnesota Vikings. Houston is a 2-point favorite. Total here is 46.5. On the Houston side, Joe Mixon is doubtful. Dameon Pierce is out, so that makes it a Kakers week. On the Minnesota side, no Jordan Addison yet again. High-low, this is a pretty rough matchup schematically for Houston, at least if you look at some of these pressure splits that Minnesota has brought. I mean, Stroud's really struggled versus pressure. All the Houston wide receivers have really struggled versus pressure. How do you want to handle the Houston side of this game, and what are you going to do with the Cam Akers chalk?
Yeah, so Scott mentioned earlier the fact that there might be some viable paydown options as leverage off of Cam Akers, and I would respond to that by saying the leverage off of Cam Akers is to not play a running back priced below 6,200. So I like, just because this slate is starved for value, like even with other than the very clear spots, the Zach Charbonnets, the Jordan Masons, the Cam Akers, like, so it feels like the field is going to be looking to the running back position to find their value, because we have 5 tight ends priced above 4,500 that we want to play. There's, CeeDee Lamb is on this slate. There's Devon Achane that we want to play at 7K. So pricing feels a lot tighter this week. And so without any clear like value away from the running back position, that's just going to be a very standard build this week. So for me, that's why I like Saquon Barkley. That's why I like, playing Saquon Barkley with Alvin Kamara. You're not sacrificing ceiling, but you're sacrificing a little bit of median projection doing that, which is okay if you do it in the right ways. So while Cam Akers has like the highest median projection in a point per dollar sense on the slate, because he's priced at bare minimum on FanDuel, he's priced at 4,700, whatever it is on DraftKings. His path to ceiling in this spot, and that's like for his price 22 to 25 points on DK, is very, very thin. I call Brian Flores the mad genius defensive coordinator, just because he throws some wild shit at you that you are not expecting. And he makes you play like street ball is how it's the easiest way to conceptualize it. He makes you be reactive as an offensive coordinator. You're not able to run a guy in motion, which we expect Bobby Slowick to utilize. Even if you're moving a guy in motion to see how the linebackers react, the linebackers are already doing jumping jacks behind the, 3-4 yards behind the defensive line. You don't get a lot of information out of that. So the way that he is able to, while playing, and this is Brian Flores, while playing heavy rates of zone, but still get the pressure and via these unique blitzes, these crazy linebacker stunts, all these things that he's doing, is really, really hard to game plan against. So that kind of throws these opposing offenses into like, I call it, there's like 3 phases of an NFL game. There's like the game plan mode, the adjustments mode, and then the oh shit phase, which is like, we got to just try and win this game. All bets are off. He kind of just throws opposing offenses directly into the adjustments phase, is kind of the way to conceptualize what he does. So yeah, this is a very, very difficult matchup. That said, I think there's still upside in a guy like Nico Collins. We've seen over the first 2 weeks in the season, Nico Collins is really Stroud's guy, his go-to guy out of structure. So like scrambles, if he's facing pressure, he's looking eyes downfield for Nico Collins. And Nico Collins is able to break free and, get these 20-yard gains where Stroud is spending 7 seconds in the backfield. So yeah, I like Nico Collins for upside if you want to get crazy for GPP. I think if you do that, you almost must play him with Justin Jefferson. So that's a lot of salary sunk.
Yeah, certainly like that Nico Collins call. Scott, anything to add on high-lows analysis on the Houston side of this game?
I don't know. I've sort of struggled with this. I like Sam Darnold. I like Justin Jefferson a lot at, 4% ownership. I like Jalen Naylor, the ass god, who Kevin O'Connell said he's playing the TJ Hawkinson role until Hawkinson comes back. He scored a touchdown in both of his last 2 games, 1% ownership. And so like, I'm looking at the opposite side of it, and it's like, I could see a path, right? Joe Mixon's out. How many times have CJ Stroud doubles broke the slate? Tank Dell's too cheap relative to his upside, at least the upside he flashed last year. And Nico Collins, honestly, to me, just looks like Julio Jones 2.0. And I know that should be illegal to say, but he is just so freaking good. And so there's all that. But there's also, we have a former NFL scout. He was a scout with the Browns for the past 10 years. And he had this as a matchup to avoid. Texans have really struggled with blitz pickup this year. And then the Vikings also play a lot of too high, which has really been the kryptonite for not just Nico Collins, but also Tank Dell and also Stephon Diggs historically. And there is no Joe Mixon. So why wouldn't you just do that all day and dare Cam Akers with his lack of Achilles to beat you? And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I did want to make the pitch though. Like if you are going to try and lean into the upside here, Sam Darnold is PFF's 3rd highest graded passer. He ranks 6th best in fantasy points per dropback. And keep in mind, this is an offense that typically leads the league in dropbacks per game. Houston secondary has been really bad. Brett Whitefield, our resident film expert, has just been destroying them on every single show he's done thus far. Derek Stingley is going to shadow Justin Jefferson. He's given up the 4th most yards to wide receivers this year without shadows. That's so like Alec Pierce and so some other guys like that. Kamari Laster, Jalen Petree really struggling, especially deep. It's a home game. We know Justin Jefferson gets like a 50% boost to his DraftKings fantasy point per game average at home in the Dome. So, we haven't really seen it in the numbers, Houston getting exposed because he faced Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams. But I don't know. I kind of like that at what is he, 5% owned, and then Justin Jefferson 4% owned. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I certainly like the Minnesota side of this game, especially the passing attack there with Darnold. I do really, really like Jalen Naylor. And I think, high-low noted, if a lot of people are searching for value at running back, guys like Jalen Naylor, Jordan Whittington are going to go relatively under-owned on this slate.
Yes,
and I think it's a lot more exciting to build a team with some value wide receivers, expensive running backs. You're kind of flipping the default build a little bit there. So I certainly like that for tournaments. Moving on here to Green Bay at Tennessee. The Packers are 3-point dogs. There's some 2.5s out there. Total is 38. Injuries, obviously the big one. Jordan Love is questionable with his MCL sprain. Sounds like he will be a true game time decision. On the Tennessee side, Tajay Spears is listed as questionable. He did practice in full on Friday. He's indicated he believes he will play, so I think he'll suit up. We'll start with the Green Bay side. It's quite difficult to do analysis when we don't quite know who the quarterback is. At the same time, I think regardless if it's Malik Willis or if it's a hobbled Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs is going to get fed here. Scott, what's your take on the Packers side of this game.
Yeah, I wish I had a good read. I think Jacobs is fine. I mean, we saw him run 32 times last week and hit value despite facing stacked boxes 50% of the time. Wasn't super high on my list, but did have him in consideration. I think this is going to be really interesting. I think Love is probably out. We saw the line move in Green Bay's favor and then come back down. I don't know if that really tells us anything, but maybe that's people who kind of know he's out. But if he plays, I haven't really thought about it, but Jaden Reed is going to be massively underowned. And I absolutely love that guy. I don't know. Hilo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's just a hairy spot all the way around. You look at this Titans defense and they're giving up 4 yards per carry after last season, 3.8 yards per carry. Not exactly a great spot. Oh my God. My pivot from the running back chalk last week was Josh Jacobs. Priced at 6,500 last week. Playing Josh Jacobs made it so I did not get to Alvin Kamara. So it's fresh in my brain. And he fumbles entering the end zones. Damn it, dude.
I thought he had a touchdown last week.
No, he fumbled into the end zone. He had 140 yards or whatever it was.
151. Yep.
Yeah, he legit fumbled
no
in the end
targets.
zone. Yeah, it was gross. But that was all Matt LaFleur last week. Noticing that he called it. I mean, and I called it last week going into that week. I was like, I would not be surprised if Malik Willis attempted 12 to 15 pass attempts. And that was kind of exactly where he was at. But Matt LaFleur is legit a top one, a top 3 at least.
That was an all-time in your bag performance by him. That was generational in your bag.
Yeah, that was legit. And because why was that? Because the Colts play such a static cover 3 defense that, as I described earlier, when we were talking about what I want to see from Kellen Moore this week, the ability to have this man gap run scheme against cover 3 is just so juicy. Anything that you get single high, because if you can get a pulling guard into the second level and just open that hole for the running back, he's not getting touched for 10 yards. And that's what we saw Josh Jacobs just consistently racking up 10-yard carries. This week, though, against a Titans defense that is actually one of my pleasant surprises, who's Denard Wilson, right? This is the new defensive coordinator. He has his roots in Baltimore with the Jets. But he is a very, very kind of intricate defensive coordinator. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with their unit. And they went out and they brought in some big names this offseason as well. And they're playing a really, really good unit. So LaFleur is really going to have his work cut out for him this week. So as far as Packers, I don't really have any real lean either way or any strong feelings about playing any of them. I mean, they're pass catchers, they're rotating 6 of them. It's Bo Melton saw a bunch of snaps last week too. So I don't know. I just don't really see anything to get overly excited about for GPPs from the Packers.
Yeah, I think even if Jordan Love plays, this is a particularly brutal pass game matchup. And like Hilo noted, they're rotating these wide receivers quite a bit, and they could still lean pretty heavy into the ground game if they don't think Jordan Love is 100%, which I believe he clearly won't be if he did play in this game. Scott, anything to add on the Packers side, and what are your thoughts on the Titans here?
Don't have much on the Titans. Pollard's interesting, but you and I kind of had the same lean, which is just I don't know. I kind of buy into Brian Callahan saying he wants a 50-50 committee. But I know you disagree, Hilo. So why don't you make your case?
Yeah. So Brian Callahan he's said it since 6 weeks before the start of the NFL season. He's like, these guys are interchangeable. We'll be utilizing a 50-50 split. And then week 1 happened. And then Tajay Spears picked up an ankle injury. So I don't know if I'm fully ready to push that I believe button just yet. Looking at Tony Pollard, 72.9% opportunity share in the backfield. That's 12th in the league right now. And he's averaging 21.5 opportunities per game. So if that holds, I think he's one of the better pivots in the 6K-ish range off of a guy like Jordan Mason, off of some of these other guys in the sub 6,500 range on DK. Because if he sees, and if And part of that also goes into kind of Brian Callahan's mentality. I mean, he has laid into Will Levis in his post-game presser in consecutive weeks. And that kind of actually rubbed me the wrong way. Like, bro, you're losing him a little bit. But in doing so, I think he's going to simplify things as much as possible for Levis this week. I mean, like this past week, he said something like, we talked specifically about his weird freaking pitch sack fumble thing that he tried to pull off. I was like, you talked specifically about him not pitching it in the green zone when he's being sacked. I find that hard to believe. Anyway, I don't know. He's just I think his leash for this stuff this decision-making that Will Levis is showing right now, I think is getting much, much shorter and shorter, to the point where I think he just simplifies the offense as much as possible this week, which would lead to increased backfield opportunities. And it's like this 3-step process, like if this happens and this happens, but I think the upside is there for GPPs, particularly, I mean, we're going to see 50, 60% maybe, depending on field size, ownership on Jordan Mason, where Tony Pollard is 200 cheaper on DK. And if he's seeing 21, 25 opportunities against Green Bay, they're a defense that is ceding 5.1 yards per carry right now. I think the upside is there. It's all about hitting the bonus and finding the end zone.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good call on Pollard for GPPs. It'll be interesting to keep track of Spears' status. Callahan did note after week 1, he wanted to get Spears a little bit more involved, and we did see that in the first half of week 2, but with the ankle injury, Pollard's been playing quite well. I could absolutely see, 18 to 20 touches for Pollard this week. All right, moving on here to the Chicago Bears at the Indianapolis Colts. It's a pick'em. Total here is 43.5. On the injury front, no Keenan Allen this week for Chicago. Rome Odunze does not have an injury designation, so he will play. On the Indianapolis side, they will be without DeForest Buckner. Michael Pittman also listed as questionable due to a back issue. Shane Steichen did say that he thinks Pittman will play, but this is worth keeping an eye on. Pittman did not practice today. Scott, I know you always have some interest in Anthony Richardson, especially when he's projecting for 4, 5, 6% ownership. What are your thoughts on him and the Colts this week?
Yeah, I mean, that should just never be the case. Like, we know who he is, leading the league in fantasy points per dropback this year, like last year, probably finishes as the QB3 to the QB5. Just frustrating week to week volatility. We saw that, 27 points in week 1, 13 points in week 2. But that's something we want to lean into for tournaments, especially at 4% ownership. You could say the on paper matchup's tough. That doesn't really matter too much when you're a quarterback like Richardson who runs. Getting back Josh Downs, I think, will help the offense. So I really love him. I think he's an awesome play for tournaments. If you want a galaxy brain play, I kind of like Caleb Williams. This is really Brett's take. But he just thinks this is the ultimate matchup for him. Like, they still have a great wide receiver core, even with a banged up Keenan Allen, but it's really this bottom 3 offensive line that's been holding them back. But Indianapolis doesn't have DeForest Buckner, probably doesn't have Latu. It's a bottom 6 secondary as well. And so he just sees Caleb Williams going back to doing what he was doing in college, which is hanging in the pocket all day, making those sick wow plays in chaos, out of structure, and really benefiting from that extra time. So I just thought that was an interesting call. But yeah, probably not a player I'm going to wind up with. But I do like Rome Odunze, who's also really cheap, carrying contrarian levels of ownership. It's a bad secondary, like I said. And now you have the fantasy points data, Rome Odunze's dad, squeaky wheel narrative. So that's pretty cool.
What is that?
So what's the announcer's name who started it for ESPN, former quarterback?
I couldn't tell you.
The guy who ran out of bounds.
Oh man, how am I drawing a blank on this?
Wait,
Chad,
what?
help us out.
Washington?
No, who's the ESPN? I'll pull it up in 1 second. You guys are killing me. Dan Orlovsky. Dan Orlovsky.
Oh, okay.
So he was like, he put out a tweet and he was like, Rome Odunze is not getting open. And then Rome Odunze's dad tweeted out or quote tweeted a chart of average separation score with Rome Odunze being open by about like 15 yards. And so they both went viral and it became this like little Twitter thing. So
No, that's funny.
maybe Rome gets more targets now.
Well, the best part of that video was that he cut out the quarterback and the offensive line and just showed Rome running his route and getting open. And it's like, I think we need a little more context.
Right.
Mr. Odunze. All right, Hilo, what are your thoughts on, this game more broadly speaking? I actually kind of liked DeAndre Swift as a bit of a galaxy brain play. The Indianapolis Colts run defense is legitimately terrible in basically every metric that matters to me. No one really seems to be looking at Swift. He's recorded 77% of backfield opportunities, 60% of inside the 10 snaps. Hilo, what are your broader thoughts on this game?
My problem is Swift is also pretty terrible. He has evaded he has forced one missed tackle on 24 attempts this season, generating just 2.04 yards after first contact. So the offensive line is doing him no favors, and he's kind of just not doing it on his own either. So that for me, Swift is an extremely difficult click. I do think that DJ Moore against a single high heavy coverage team is viable. I don't know if I'm ready to pull the trigger on Caleb Williams just for the sole fact that I think Shane Waldron is an idiot. So yeah. I can't get behind that. I was down on Chicago's pass catching core coming into the season just because Shane Waldron is an idiot. So it's kind of similar to discussion to Cliff Kingsbury. But yeah, I don't know if I can go there just because that offense is schematically tits up right now. The route structures are extremely poor. Situational play calling is really poor. They're not really utilizing pre-snap motion play action effectively. So yeah, it's just Caleb Williams I don't think that he is bad. He is the best quarterback to come out of college over the last 2-3 seasons. But I think his situation is just really, really bad. And we thought it was going to be really, really good based on his supporting cast. But man, it's just really, really bad right now.
Yeah, it has been absolutely brutal play calling from Shane Waldron so far. I do remain a little interested in Williams. I'll be at least excited to see what he does with a little more time to throw this week. Let's move on.
I have a tweet queued up if Waldron turns in another poor performance this week, which I expect, guaranteed to go viral. I'm excited about it. Be on the lookout for that tweet.
Yeah. We'll be rooting for you, man. I'll give you a retweet.
I appreciate it.
All right. Carolina Panthers at the Las Vegas Raiders. The Panthers there's some 5.5s out there, but I saw a 6-point dog at Bookmaker. Total here is 40 points. On the injury side, Tommy Tremble is questionable with a hamstring injury. That would be worth a minor boost to the mid-price Jatavion Sanders if he sat. On the Las Vegas side, Max Crosby is questionable with an ankle injury. Christian Wilkins also questionable with a knee issue. Scott, with Andy Dalton starting, it's your boy Deontay Johnson. He's back, right?
Oh yeah, he's. We have him as a top 3 play on the week. We have him as a cash lock, just about. And really, what it comes down to is just, he's the ass god. He led all wide receivers in ass and win rate last year. Andy Dalton was quietly awesome in 2022 by all of the advanced metrics, accurate throw rate, PFF grade. Over Carolina's last 65 games, it's Andy Dalton who has the most passing yards in any single game. He only started one game with the Panthers. And in that game, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark both saw double-digit targets, both exceeded 18.5 fantasy points. And I don't know, digging into the analytics, there's not the easiest argument to make, but it's really just, I think this is a statement game. The offense was totally non-viable with Bryce Young, who was throwing from his tippy toes and taking jumpers, which was just, I can't believe that actually happened on an NFL football field. They had a 0% pass rate on 3rd and longs. I think this is, they come out and they're like, no, trust us. We're competent coaches. We just had this awful quarterback, and I can see them throwing a shit ton. Garbage time is a hell of a drug. So I love Deontay. I honestly think I keep recommending these super contrarian YOLO plays, but I think Minshew's kind of in play. I think Dalton's in play. They're two super cheap guys. And I could see this being a slot fest. But yeah, so I think that's interesting. Probably not on Thielen, but I get that if someone wants to go there.
Yeah, really love Deontay Johnson this week, obviously. I mean, great value. This is just the second time since the start of the 2021 season we've gotten him sub 5K. So if the price is right, targets should be there. He should actually have catchable targets for the first time in a while. Hilo, I know you thought we were a tad low on the Raiders' pass rate in our projections. They've been pretty aggressive throwing the ball thus far. I would imagine that makes you pretty interested in guys like Brock Bowers, Devontae Adams, which, by the way, Devontae Adams has a pretty great schematic matchup, as Ryan Heath pointed out in his column.
On paper matchup too. He's up against JC Horn, who's giving up the second most fantasy points per route.
Yeah. So the way this boils down for me is I have to kind of one of the things I like to do is kind of mix the film with the analytics and try and like put myself in the coach's position by doing so. If I am Luke Getsy and I know my offensive line is absolute trash, I know that my running back, sorry, Zamir White truthers. I know that my running back room is absolute trash. How do I move the football? And when I watch the tape on the first two games, the offensive structure, the layering of routes, the use of pre-snap motion, the use of the things that we like to see was all really, really good. Gardner Minshew was incapable of delivering a football on time in week 1. He basically made it through his first read and then got happy feet when he was under pressure. And that's another, the offensive, like nod to the offensive line being trash. But in week 2, when they made the adjustments, Gardner Minshew with more time was able to, get through his progressions, read a defense and deliver the football on time. And we saw when he was delivering the football on time at a very high rate, it was going to one of two people. It was Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams. Sorry, Jacoby Myers truthers, like he's right out. Like the number of counting shall be 2 in this offense. It's just 2 players that are like Brock Bowers is just that good, right? So when I see that this team has a second ranked pass rate over expectation, second only to the Chiefs, when I'm like diagnosing like the why behind that, to me, it's because that's their most efficient way of moving the football. To me, it's instead of, running Zamir White's head into a wall 10, 12 times on first down, let's stay ahead of the sticks. And the easiest way to do that is via this solid pass game structure that we have. So that's what I see on tape. That's what I think is going on here. And if that's the case against a Panthers team that ranks 6th in pressure rate this season, and both these defenses are not, the Raiders are dead last in pressure rate so far. So in both of these offenses their quarterbacks should have time. We expect that Andy Dalton is going to make the Panthers at least like coherent, like they're going to be able to have an offense. So to me, like, I think the Raiders could come out and throw 35, 38 times here. Most projections have him around 30 to 32. And that's what I was screaming to bump up. So that's just based off like my read of what trying to put myself in Getsy's shoes here and see like what he's doing. And if that's the case against this Panthers team, man, like I am all in on, and this might even be like my single entry starting point this week is Gardner Minshew, Devontae Adams, and Brock Bowers. Like that's the starting point for me and you can bring it back to Deontay Johnson as like that bring back if you want. But I really like the upside here this week.
Yeah, I really like that call for tournaments. Also, like mini stacks here could go Deontay Bowers, Devontae.
Yeah.
I think all those options are pretty strong. We spent enough time on this game. Let's move on to Miami at Seattle. Total here is 42. Miami is a 4.5 point underdog. Obviously, no Tua this week. So Skylar Thompson will be making his first start since 2022. Raheem Mostert is doubtful. So expect another massive workload for Devon Achane. On the Seattle side, Kenneth Walker is doubtful, so we're looking at another massive snap share for Zach Charbonnet. Starting with the Miami side, obviously Skylar Thompson is a pretty big downgrade for Tyreek Hill, but he might arguably be an upgrade for Devon Achane, who leads the position in targets. No quarterback has targeted running backs more than Skylar Thompson. He absolutely loves checking that ball down. And Devon Achane is getting peppered with targets. Hilo, I'll throw it over to you. How do you want to play Achane, Tyreek in a game where the Miami offense could be pretty gross, but we're getting Tyreek at reduced ownership. Achane won't be the most popular running back of the slate, probably around that 15% range, which is generally pretty tempting for a guy who's as explosive as he is. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so if you look at Achane's snap rates from last season to this season, they're about in line. He's playing only 56.5% of the offensive snaps. What has changed is when he's on the field, very similar to like Derrick Henry in his last season with the Titans, when he's on the field, he has such a high opportunity to snap rate. So they're getting him the football when he's on the field, and that makes sense. Like, let's get one of our best players the football, right? Let's get the most efficient running back in the history of the league the football. That makes a lot of sense. So while we're probably going to see him in the 55-60% snap rate range, there's still very clear paths to him seeing 25 plus running back opportunities. You mentioned the Skylar Thompson running back target rate. And this is already for a running back who's seen 7 targets in each game this season. So, and that's like, those aren't just scramble drill targets. Those are designed, we're splitting him wide targets. Like, those are legitimately schemed upside generating targets. So I have no problem with him. He's probably my favorite cash game running back. Yeah, I'll make that statement. And in GPPs, I love him, and I love him paired with another pay up option at the position.
Yeah, I am right with you there. Scott, anything to add on the Miami side?
I'm going to have 100% exposure to Achane this week.
Hell yeah.
But Tyreek's 2%. Tyreek's 2%, and he should never be 2%.
Yeah.
So honestly, you could play like a Skylar team, but yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, 100% to Devon Achane for me this week.
Yeah, Tyreek is one of the worst projected values on the slate, but that only makes him more tempting to me in GPPs when, no one's going to go there. No opto is going to get you there.
No sim.
Yeah, exactly. On the Seattle side, I'm pretty much only looking at Zach Charbonnet and Jackson Smith and Jigba here. JSN is looking absolutely awesome, and this should be a pretty great slot matchup. Scott, what are your thoughts on the Seahawks?
Yeah, Geno's our cash quarterback of the week on DraftKings. And Zach Charbonnet is in there as well at the running back position. Just insane usage. But partly why we like Geno is because Kenneth Walker's out. We saw them shift from bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation to top 2 last week. And, maybe that continues. Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yeah, like you said, this was finally, the breakout game we've been looking for. I think he had his most air yards of his career by over 100 last week. Slot funnel matchup. Great value at 5,400. I do also like DK Metcalf. You throw out week 1 against Patrick Surtain. He had a tough matchup against Christian Gonzalez last week, but he went off. That didn't slow him down. And, Miami hasn't really been tested all that much, but they ranked bottom 3 in team PFF coverage grade. Jalen Ramsey coming off of a hamstring doesn't look right. Bottom 20 in PFF grade. You just went nuclear in a much tougher matchup. But yeah, my lean would be JSN as well.
Yeah, definitely like that. I do think Geno's in play. Worth noting, though, he's probably going to be one of the 4 or 5 most popular quarterbacks on the slate. So that does make it a little tough, but with the pass rate spiking, certainly tempting. Hilo, anything to add on the Seattle side of this game?
I will add that Zach Charbonnet is just not that good at football.
Yeah. Our film guys said exactly that. Our charters noted in their weekly article that he looked pretty brutal on film. Yeah.
He's forced 3 missed tackles on 22 attempts. He has a 2.3 yards per carry, just 2.73 yards after first contact. And we know that that's important for this backfield because their offensive line is going to take some time if it ever improves beyond average. They're well below average right now in run blocking metrics. So Kenneth Walker was able to overcome a lot of that because he is good at football. He was, forcing a lot of missed tackles. I think he had 9 forced missed tackles in week 1 alone. So this is a situation where fine cash game play in Zach Charbonnet because the volume, the workload is going to be there. But in GPPs, give me Tony Pollard over him. Easy.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the one positive note with Charbonnet is that his 99% snap share last week was the 5th highest of any running back dating back to last season. But again, if he's not great at football, if he can't be hyper efficient, what ceiling are you really paying for at 6,000, especially when he could push for 20% ownership? It does feel like kind of gross.
He cleared an 85% snap share twice last year, and he had single digit fantasy points in both games.
Yeah, that's a great call. And especially with the pass rate spiking, I mean, it's even easier to see him potentially failing this week. All right, let's move on to the San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. 49ers are 6.5 point favorites here. Total is 43.5. Injuries, there's a ton, and unfortunately, they're all good players. San Francisco, no Deebo Samuel. George Kittle is doubtful. Nick Bosa also questionable. On the Los Angeles side, no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua. Scott, I know you're pretty worried about Brock Purdy's efficiency. His splits without Deebo are pretty brutal. What are your thoughts on him and more broadly the 49ers here?
I mean, so what happens? I know Brandon Ayuk is mega chalk, but if the 49ers and Jordan Mason mega chalk, if the 49ers just completely don't show up, what is everyone going to say? It's, oh, I knew it, Brock Purdy's a fraud, and, he was just carried by his superstars. And I don't think that's totally true, but I could really easily see that happening. Purdy's splits without Deebo alone are really, really rough. It's a small sample, whatever. But now you take George Kittle out as well. And so this isn't just on Purdy. It's a trickle down effect. Historically, San Francisco's rushing game is less efficient without George Kittle, maybe the best blocking tight end in football. Brandon Ayuk, over the last 3 games that Deebo suffered an injury or played fewer than 10 snaps, averages the same fantasy points per game as Juwan Jennings, 10.0. And you could point to the splits where it's with Deebo off the field, Ayuk has a 40% target share. But that's just heavily influenced by personnel. Wide receivers we know are dramatically more efficient in 2 wide receiver sets than 3 wide receiver sets. And there's also a big difference when the guy is out, the defense scheming to take them away. And that kind of is what we've seen when Deebo's missed all but 10 or fewer snaps. All that being said, I mean, I get the urge to go all want to stack this game up because now the offenses are a lot more condensed and they're all cheap. And so there's massive upside there. Brandon Ayuk, the argument to be made for him is obviously the ball has to go somewhere. Volume should be amazing. It's an ideal schematic matchup. It is the most perfect cornerback matchup there is. The Rams have been shadowing the corpse of Tre'Davious White these last 2 weeks. He's giving up 31% more fantasy points than any other cornerback, despite ranking just 36th in targets allowed. And so there's all that. So Cash going to play Ayuk, going to play Mason, but you're talking about tournaments, these 2 players combining for 50 plus ownership. I think there is an argument to be made to fade them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Hilo, what are your thoughts on the 49ers here?
Yeah, I think you can play them. I think you can play them smartly in ways that are not in line with the field. One way is to not play Jordan Mason with Cam Akers. One way is to not play Jordan Mason with some of the other high ownership at the position. Jordan Mason is interesting to me because I don't see a path in this matchup where he doesn't see 25 opportunities. I don't see it. I don't know how that happens, considering George Kittle's out, considering Deebo's out. If I'm Kyle Shanahan, I'm just looking to like exploit a run matchup that we should have the advantage in as much as possible. The other side of this game, can we go there? That's actually more interesting to me because the 49ers are kind of straightforward. The 49ers are a little straightforward. You mentioned him before, and that's Jordan Whittington is super interesting to me this week. He played 100% of the snaps in the second half. Once Cooper Kupp went out, his slot snap rate almost mirrors Cooper Kupp. He was at 63%. Cooper Kupp's at like sub 69%. D-Rob has a clearly defined role in this offense that's not going to change based on his skill set. And Tyler Johnson is playing the like demi Puka role in this offense. Not as well, obviously. He's not Puka Nacua, but that's kind of how they're utilizing him. So that tells me that Jordan Whittington is going to be the motion man at a 60% frequency. He's going to be the slot wide receiver. And in this matchup with a 6th round rookie as my center with all kinds of offensive line issues, how did Sean McVay like scheme up his offense against Detroit in week 1? Again, in a mismatch on the defensive line. He schemed 21 targets to Cooper Kupp. Like, I'm not saying Whittington's going to see 21 targets, but like that's his best chance of moving the football here is quick outs, slants, getting the ball to slot wide receiver out of motion. And that's Jordan Whittington. So like at 4,200, man, he's super intriguing. And when we're talking about like pay down options or the value on a slate, I always want those guys to have at least a path to 25 fantasy points because you kind of need everybody on a roster to have that kind of upside or you're not winning anything. And I think Jordan Whittington actually has a path to that. It sounds gross, but I think he actually has a path to that this week.
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. He was a training camp star, a preseason star. No team has given up a higher yards per route run to opposing slots than the 49ers. I also think it's interesting with the Tyler Johnson thing. He was actually at a 35% route share after Cooper Kupp left the game. Tutu Atwell was at 65%. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. We're splitting the difference.
They didn't just have a lot of snaps. I mean, Tutu Atwell played 10 offensive snaps that game. They just had a bunch of 3-and-outs in the second half. They just didn't have the football.
I just wanted to note that because I do think there's a lot more volatility with a guy like Tyler Johnson and his role than there is with Jordan Whittington. I feel like his role is pretty secure here. I think the Jordan Whittington props, by the way, whether it's receptions or receiving yards, are very, very juicy this week. Scott, anything to add on these Rams wide receivers, and what are your thoughts on Kyren Williams?
Kyren Williams is like popping as a great value for us. I don't know. I feel like he's okay. I'm not all that excited to play him. Just this offensive line is dead. I'm kind of worried. They struggle to get going. So much of his value comes from his league high red zone XFP per game last year. And I don't know how many red zone drives there's going to be. But I really think Hilo nailed it. Like in his article, he called Whittington the skeleton key or one of the skeleton keys to the slate. And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We did get a comment about Juwan Jennings. I just don't have any particular interest. I don't see a, great ceiling here. Hilo, Scott, any thoughts on Juwan?
I think he's sneaky relative to ownership. I was looking at I expected to just not even write him up. So maybe this is me just like trying to think too deeply or try and get this blurb to work. But, you could just say he's never really done anything in 47 career games on one of the best offenses in football. But Debo pulled a hamstring in the Super Bowl, right? You remember that? It was Jennings who led their receivers in fantasy points. In the divisional round, Samuel only played 9 snaps. Jennings had twice as many yards as Ayuk. In the last game Debo missed before that, Jennings had a team high 9 targets. And so maybe 4,100, 9%. Maybe that's a leverage play on Ayuk. But like I said, maybe I'm just overthinking it.
I'd much rather just play Jordan Whittington here.
For sure.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Detroit Lions at the Arizona Cardinals. This is the highest total game of the week at 51.5. Detroit is a 2.5 point favorite. Only injury note is that Greg Dortch is questionable. with a hamstring injury.
Damn it.
I want to start with the Cardinals side because Kyler Murray is coming off of what I think was his best game ever. He was the third player since 1974 to post a perfect passer rating and rush for over 50 yards. I watched the film. He looked absolutely awesome. This is a mega high total game. The offense is clicking. Kyler's looking great as both a runner and a thrower. I want about as much Kyler as I can possibly get this week. Hilo, what are your thoughts on Kyler, the Arizona offense, stacking partners here?
Yeah, I was at that game and the crowd was going absolutely apeshit bonkers on some of those plays. Kyler looked legit like MVP level. The problem with Kyler for me is Drew Petzing is a wizard when he's designing a run scheme. Some of the things that he does in the run game it's wizard like. In the pass game, he's atrocious. It's bad. It's really bad. Like last season, you expect the baseline, the median for a yards per attempt boost from play action to be about 55%. So a quarterback behind play action is expected to pass for 55% more yards behind play action. Kyler's last year was 34%. So that tells me that like Drew Petzing is one, not utilizing play action enough, and two, not utilizing play action effectively. And it's not like they didn't have speed last year. I mean, Hollywood was available for most of the year. They had, the guy who went to Atlanta and then got injured. I forgot his name.
Rondale.
So Rondale Moore. Yeah, they had speed. So it's very weird. I'll sum it like this. Kyler Murray has to overcome his offensive coordinator through the air, as opposed to his offensive coordinator putting him in best position to maximize his upside.
Yeah, he is one of the players who can do that. Absolutely. But that is a great take with you there. Scott, what are your thoughts on the Arizona side of this game? It's a strong schematic matchup for Marvin Harrison Jr. Do you have a preference when it comes to Kyler Murray stacking partners? I know you like him this week.
I just wanted to add one note on Kyler. Maybe you have a thought here, Hilo, but Detroit has given up a league high 5.4 rushing fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks since 2022. Even if you schedule adjust it, it's still easily far and away the most of any team. I asked Brett about this. He was like, I don't think it's any schematic thing. Maybe it's just random. I don't know. But so that's a boost. What's that?
It's because they're in cover one so much. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then there you go. And then they're also a top 5 pass funnel this year. So really great spot for him. I think the trickiest thing is who do you stack him with? And then the bring back tricky as well. So it's a single high heavy matchup, which should be great for Marvin Harrison Jr. I said leading into the season that I expected him to really struggle against the Bills. But schematically, it looked like a great spot last week, and we kind of saw that play out. He had 5 targets, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns in just the first quarter, 9 routes, 14.4 yards per route run. And so it's man single high heavy defense. The thing is, it's a really good pass rush, and who destroyed this Lions team. You can say it was just wide receiver ones, or you can say it was Cooper Kupp in the Cooper Kupp role, and then Chris Godwin in the Cooper Kupp role. And then who's kind of like their short to underneath, slot guy. That's really more Trey McBride. And so I've been having trouble picking between these two. So I kind of want to just hear Hilo's thoughts.
Yeah, what was interesting to me from that Cardinals game, and specifically with Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr., is only one of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s receptions was in structure. So was by design with a clean pocket. The other 3 receptions were all out of structure. So that was Kyler Murray just doing Kyler Murray shit behind the line, avoiding pressure, and Marvin Harrison Jr. getting open. So 1 out of 8 targets resulted in a reception in structure for Marvin Harrison Jr. last week. So I'm still struggling with this offense. I really am. I don't know what to make of it. And when I don't have a good read, I typically just want to watch more film, and we don't have that because it's week 2. So I don't really know what to say, honestly.
Yeah, definitely a tricky spot with Kyler Murray stacking partners, I imagine I'll be trying to split my exposures roughly even between Marvin Harrison Jr. and McBride. But yeah, it is tough to know. On the Lions side, Detroit notoriously great in these high total games. Jahmyr Gibbs' usage has been excellent this year. The Jameson Williams breakout looks very, very real. Amon-Ra St. Brown is coming off a 19 target outing. Scott, how are you prioritizing the Lions this week?
I don't know. Maybe it's just my mood. I want to give the contrarian take here and say Sam Laporta. Nothing about his projection, nothing about the matchup, schematic or on paper really stands out. But it's Ben Johnson literally told us it's going to be a Sam Laporta week. maybe I'm reading too much into that, where he was just like, well, week one, it was Jameson's week. Last week, it was Amon-Ra's week. And this is Laporta's week. And maybe I'm overreading that, but it's notable to me that Dan Campbell said the exact same thing. He said, I don't know, this is the week we get Sam Laporta going because, don't forget, he had that injury and he didn't practice the last 3 weeks of training camp. So we didn't really have an install for him early on, but this is the week we get him going. And so it's just 2% owned. Underrated upside relative to that. So I just think that's interesting. But yeah, obviously, if you want to say, hey, Jameson's breakout is really real, it 100% looks like that, and he is not really priced in line with that, you can say that. Or you could say Amon-Ra has hit, 22 DraftKings fantasy points in 80% of his last, 40 games. You could say that as well. But I just kind of like that angle because no one else is on it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You'll see tight end ownership really concentrated, especially at the high end around Bowers and McBride. So, stepping away to a different expensive tight end and GPPs can certainly make some sense. Hilo, anything to add on the Detroit side of this game?
Yeah, I think the most interesting guy is actually David Montgomery for me. 18 opportunities in week 1, 15 in week 2. We expect that Detroit should be able to win the offensive line, defensive line mismatch there. With Arizona, really, they don't bring pressure. They don't get pressure. And they kind of just play this sit back coverage. So Dave Montgomery has a path to 18 to 20 opportunities here. And based on his efficiency, he has the chance to put up a 102 type game here.
Yeah, and especially in a high total game where a lot of people are excited to play some Lions, Montgomery is one who's always going to be overlooked because you can't quite pair him with Goff. It just feels a little gross to play a guy who doesn't catch passes, but we know he has the touchdown upside. Jahmyr Gibbs' role has been better. Montgomery's still being favored about 65-35 inside the 10, which is obviously crucial for upside. Need those touchdowns. Before we move on, any thoughts on James Conner, Scott? Similar to Montgomery, he could go a little overlooked.
Yeah. I'm not really on either guy. With Montgomery, it's just he has one game with 100 plus rushing yards and a touchdown, or games with 2 touchdowns. So it just hasn't happened. But I get it. You win massively if that hits, because he also works as leverage. And James Conner, it's the exact same thing. And don't sleep on this team being stubbornly run heavy. Like you said, this is a genius play designer for the running game. Arizona ranked bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation last year, but second best in yards per carry, dangerously close to the Dolphins. But yeah, I'm probably not playing either guy.
Yep, makes sense. Baltimore Ravens at the Dallas Cowboys, our final game here. Total is 48. Baltimore's a 1-point favorite. Only injury note here is that Jake Ferguson will be back from the bone bruise that caused him to miss week 2. Scott, I thought your Lamar Jackson analysis here was pretty interesting. Do you want to talk about him, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews?
Yeah, I do just think he's interesting. The spread is close. They're only 1.0 favorites. The open as underdogs. Jackson averages about 50% more rushing yards per game and losses since 2022. It makes sense. He's not going to go crazy when you have a lead, but if the game's on the line, he's really going to push it, take off. You see that with him under pressure as well. Massive increase in scramble rate and fantasy points per opportunity. You see that. His fantasy points per dropback does drop against zone, which Dallas runs at the second highest rate. But interestingly, his scramble rate triples. Wasn't really sure what to make of that. I just think he's probably your best pay up quarterback to me, just rushing upside and slate wrecking potential. But not really someone I'm all that in love with, but yeah, I like him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I also think, the stacking partners are pretty clear here. Zay Flowers ranks behind only Cooper Kupp in expected fantasy points per game among wide receivers. With the extra pressure from Dallas, Flowers could absolutely be peppered with short area targets. Mark Andrews was also the Ravens' go-to pass catcher against zone coverage last year. Smoked Zay Flowers in yards per out run against zone. He's also the cheapest he's been since week 10 of 2020 for Mark Andrews. Hilo, any thoughts on the Ravens and how do you want to play this game as a whole?
No, I mean, Mark Andrews was the most efficient pass catcher from a fantasy points per route run against zone last year before getting injured. So
do you know who ranks third best this year though?
Is it likely?
Likely with double that of any other Baltimore receiver.
Yeah, that's what I figured. That's a schematic element of this offense. Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think both those guys are in play.
I feel the same way. I wrote up my Zay Flowers blurb and I'm like, 4% ownership. I'm going all in. And then I dug into the zone stuff and it's like, they really do use their tight ends as zone beaters.
Yeah.
So that made it tricky, which wasn't ideal for me.
Yeah. Big discount on Mark Andrews. So certainly
he's the better play. Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to pull a ton of ownership too. I'm seeing 6 to 8% across.
But you want to talk about schematic matchups and tight ends. So we know Baltimore is going to play a lot of too high coverage. Do you know who led Dallas in fantasy points per route run against too high coverage last year?
Fergie.
It was Fergie ahead of CeeDee Lamb, who had like the most dramatic single versus too high splits. He's also like, just look at his last 7 full games, 7.6 targets per game, 15.5 DraftKings fantasy points per game. Would have led the position last year. He was already a value to me in week 1. Now he's $700 cheaper. So I like him a lot as well. I think he's one of the best values at the position for sure.
Yeah, I do think he could pull the most ownership of any tight end this week, but it's, because he's a great play. Hilo, what are your thoughts on Ferguson, Cowboys more broadly?
Couldn't have said any better myself.
Great. Awesome.
The thing is like, it's not a CeeDee Lamb matchup, right?
Yeah.
But like this, you have the potential for this game to just wreck the slate.
Yeah.
And in which case you have to play CeeDee Lamb.
You can play, if you're playing Ferg, you can do it with Dak and CD. If you're playing CD, you absolutely must play Dak as well. And that eats up a lot of salary this week. So I get how you can go either way there.
Yeah, it does eat up a ton of salary, but outside of Ferguson, I mean, no one in this game is really projecting for much ownership as game stacks go on high total games. Sure, some of the options are expensive, but your cumulative ownership is going to be pretty low here, which certainly makes it tempting, at least to me. Any final thoughts on this game, guys, before we wrap up here?
No, sir.
I don't think so.
All right. So if you guys play any Battle Royale, definitely stay on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. Me and Ryan Heath will be breaking down the slate from a Battle Royale perspective here in probably just about 5 or 10 minutes for the Underdog Drafter Party. So definitely check that out. But for Scott, for Hilo, for Thomas behind the glass, really appreciate everybody tuning into the Week 3 edition of Cashing Points, and we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.